welcome back to Making the Changes. Sorry it's been such a long time since part one, but as you can probably see, we've had quite a change around in the studio here. Hope you like the new look, and let's get right on with it. Now in part one, we dealt almost exclusively with chord sequences that didn't change key. This time we're going to look at chord sequences that do change key, and in order to do that, first of all, I'm going to give you a little practical exercise which is really helpful just in making sure that you can find all the basic scale and arpeggio fingerings under your fingers that you're going to need, because particularly as things begin to modulate, you can't be flying up and down the neck every time the key changes. So here's a really simple exercise that's been very beneficial for me. I use it with a lot of my students, and it is simply to try and make sure that we can play the major scale initially in 12 keys within a 5 fret area of the guitar and the corresponding major 7th arpeggio fingerings that go with them. So because there are 12 keys, we're going to be able to play 5 of those keys starting on the bottom string, the next 5 starting on the 5th string, and then the remaining 2 will start on the 4th string. And the area of the guitar that I'm going to use for this, we could use any area, but for now we're going to go right in the middle of the fretboard and we're going to use the 5th to the 9th fret area. Now the lowest note in that area is an A natural, and the highest note in that region is a C sharp. So if we start with A major, that means that we can get just over 2 octaves of the scale without going outside of our region, and likewise with the arpeggio we'll be able to start on a low root and go to a high third up here on the 9th fret. I'll just play that for you. All of these fingerings are on the PDF, so don't worry about getting them down from me. I just want to make sure that you understand the basic exercise. So here we go with A major between the 5th and the 9th frets in its full extent. So scale first, arpeggio next. If we move up in half steps through the 12 keys, this is what we're going to end up with. B flat, we'll start on the 2nd finger, 6th fret, I'm sure you're familiar with this fingering. It's going to go as high as the 9th and down to a low 7th and back. And then the arpeggio will go similarly. Got to remember to include the low 7th in the arpeggio as well. 2 for the price of 1 if we want B major, because the same fingering fits within our designated area. So B major, same thing. But when I want C major, I'm going to have to start on my little finger now to fit it all in. The 7th is going to be up there on the 9th fret 4th string. And notice we had a couple of notes down below where we started that time. D flat major, very similar fingering, but we're going to reach back now for the 7th. It's going to be on the 3rd string 5th fret. And now we're going to move on to the 5th string for D major. You notice obviously that the higher we go, the more there is that's back down at the bottom underneath where we started. E flat, 2nd finger, 6th fret, 5th string. E major. And for F major now, little finger on the 8th fret. Notice the low 3rd in the scale and the arpeggio now. 2 for the price of 1 again here. We can port that up wholesale to make F sharp. G major now. The lowest G that we can get in this region is on the 4th string, 5th fret. A lot of people aren't so good at starting their scales and arpeggios off the middle string, so be sure to do these because it's really important. We're going to have a lot down below the starting tone now. And the final key is A flat, also from the 4th string. Slightly awkward arpeggio fingering. And then if I go up another half step, I'm an octave above where I started. So it's going to be the same fingering that I played at the outset, although it might still be worth doing actually just from the point of view of seeing where it is from the middle. You can see why, can't you? Anyway, there we go. That's the 12 major scales and the 12 major 7th arpeggios that go with them in a 5 fret area. Now, obviously there's more to life than major scales and major 7th arpeggios. But the great news is that once you've done that exercise, you've done a heck of a lot of the work for all of the other basic chord types as well. Because let's say we want something like a minor 7th chord and a Dorian scale to go with it. Well, if you take that G major that we just played that started on the 4th string on the 5th fret, now if I follow that all the way down there to the low A, that's going to be an A Dorian scale now. So we've already done the fingering, we're just starting it and ending it in a different place. We will obviously need a new arpeggio fingering. This time it's going to be a minor 7th off A. And notice how I went up to the high C there because that's an arpeggio tone and it's within the area. So you then go through and you do all of your Dorian modes like that. But the thing is, it's not as if you're really starting from scratch because all of those are going to be the same major scale fingerings that you just did. Yes, the arpeggios are different, so that's a little bit of extra work, but you don't need to start learning a whole new bunch of fingerings. Obviously, it is important to see something like a Dorian scale as an entity in its own right, because harmonically it's not the same thing as a major scale, but it's really daft to fail to see the link between the fingerings. If you know a major scale inside out and back to front in 12 keys in any one place on the guitar, then you know all your Dorians, all your Mixolydians, all your Lydians and Locrians and everything else that comes from a major scale. And obviously if you want to do something like a minor 7th flat 5 chord, this A here, again the low A, the scale that goes with that is usually the Locrian mode. Well, that's the same thing as that familiar B flat major that we've just played. So the B flat major was this. But if we start there, and we just need a new arpeggio to go with it, which is the A minor 7th flat 5. And then so on, you move up in half steps, and you can do that with Mixolydian, dominant 7ths and so on. But the important thing is that what you're doing all the time is reinforcing these same basic underlying major 7th, major scale fingerings. There's a lot more you can do with that exercise, but I wanted to share that with you right from the get-go, because as we start moving through different keys in these upcoming examples, it's going to be really helpful if you know that whatever key you're in, it's there under your fingers. Obviously you could do that with harmonic minor scales, melodic minor scales and so forth. It's a very wide-ranging exercise potentially, but to begin with, if you've never done it before, start with the major scale and the important modes that come from it, like the Dorian, Mixolydian and Locrian with their corresponding arpeggios. Okay, now that we've done that, let's look at some of these common modulations. Now the example that I gave in the first video was The Way You Look Tonight, and that's a tune that if it's played in F will go to A flat in the middle. Now what's important about that is the distance travelled, because it's a third. It's what's called a tertiary modulation, technically speaking, because it's a tune in F and then the new tonality when it comes is a minor third up. There's an awful lot of jazz tunes that move by thirds in either direction. Could be a major or a minor third, and it could be up or down. Another example of a modulation of a minor third up would be in Green Dolphin Street. If you play that in E flat, there's a phrase which is like a little 2-5-1 in the original key that goes in E flat, and then the next phrase now ended up in G flat major, so that's again a distance up a minor third. Up a major third is very common as well. A tune in F might find its way to A major in the middle, in the bridge. Great example of this would be something like Polka Dots and Moonbeams. If I just pick this up midway through the second A section, we'd have this. Into the bridge, and it's now a major third higher in A. Now those are both examples of the key centre rising by a third, a major or a minor third. It's equally common for the key centre to descend by a third, so something in F might wind up in D flat, and a great example of this would be In a Sentimental Mood by Duke Ellington, again in the middle. If I pick it up somewhere in the middle of the A section, that's how it ends, but then you're off into D flat for all of that part. So it's a beautiful device, very common. And then the fourth possibility, which is possibly slightly less common, but it still certainly exists, is the one where you go down a minor third. So if you were in F, you'd work your way into D major. Now, it must be D major at the end of that process rather than D minor, because obviously F major to D minor, that's just the relative major and minor of a pair. So really that's almost not a modulation at all. But if you're in F and you go to D major, then that definitely is a remote modulation. All the Things You Are is a great example of that in the bridge. If you think about the bridge of All the Things You Are, it begins in the key of G. And the key after that is E major, so the distance travelled down a minor third, another tertiary modulation. There's also Tico Tico, that was the example I used on the PDF, the sort of Latin samba-y tune. Then it goes into all of that A major stuff in that little trio section there. There's a lot of examples. Now obviously if these are very common modulations, then we've got to have lines that describe them. And part of that is going to require that we have basic arpeggio fingerings together without having to fly up and down the guitar. So that was where that earlier exercise came in. But what I'm going to do now is just play one or two example lines, and just for ease of analysis I'm going to start in C and play lines that move to all four of the possible tertiary modulations. In terms of the actual structure and content of the lines, I'll analyse that on the PDF, but it's going to be predominantly arpeggio material, a little bit of scale material, there'll be some chromaticism, and something else that you might hear a lot of actually in there, because I do tend to do this as a force of habit, is what I call a tetrachord, which is the thing of playing a triad with an extra note in there, so a little four-note grouping. If you're on C, it might be something like 1, 2, 3, 5, or descending. find that to be a very useful building block of lines. So that plus some little chromatic movements and the scales and arps is probably what's going to give you the general content, but that's all going to be analysed on the PDF. So here we go then with a few lines that take us from C major into 4 different related keys in 4/4 time. First of all, let's go from C major into A flat major. So that's going to be the modulation that goes down a major third. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. I'll try and play that again or something like it. A 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. I'm not exactly sure whether that was the same or not. I tried to make it the same. It was certainly similar. Okay, so that's down from C into A flat. Let's go now from C down into A. This is the one that happens in the bridge of All the Things You Are. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Bit longer that one because I played through the resolution. Let me try another one. It may be the same or similar. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Let's have a look at the rising ones. Here's C into E flat. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Just play that again. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. And finally, C into E major. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Let me play that again or something similar. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, and. Now it really is well worth practicing that sort of thing. Generating lines, you'll notice I didn't move my hand very far any of the time there when I was changing key. You're going to have to sort of compose them a bit. It's not going to come straight out of the clear blue sky if you've never done it before. You're going to have to think about it. But what I would encourage you to do is to really think about all of this stuff in terms of relationships rather than specific chords. I did all of that in C just for ease of comparison. But if you can sort of have it compartmentalised in your mind in terms of it's the modulation that goes up a minor third or down a major third or whatever, that's something that's really going to stand you in very good stead. And more often than not, what those modulations do is they return home to the original key somewhere, usually by some sort of fairly standard means. Very often it's round the cycle of fourths and fifths, something like that. And you'll be getting more into the kinds of things we were talking about in the first video. Thanks so much for your patience, and especially those of you that bought the first class of this pair. It's been a long time sorting out the studio. You can see the environment around me has changed quite a lot, so thanks for your patience. All of these things are coming and I hope you'll bear with me. Thanks so much for all of your support. Hope we'll see you again soon in another class.